Good. We have an action-packed meeting today, and I want to uh, welcome you all to it. So let's jump right in. First, John, do you want to talk to us about minutes?
Yes, I distributed yesterday minutes for our May 14th meeting, and not sure if anyone had any proposed changes to the minutes. If not, I move that we approve the May 14th minutes as distributed.
And
Do we have a second?
I'll offer a second.
Good. And Bianca
Yes.
and Chris,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Brian,
Yes.
and I'm a yes as well. The second item I wanted to talk about is the July meeting. I am going to be on vacation out of the country when the meeting's scheduled July 9th, which is fine. The meeting can go ahead without me. But I want to make sure we're going to have a quorum. Are the other four of you able to be here on July 9th?
That's the current plan. So
Yeah, I have no problem with July 9th.
Yep, I'll be here.
And John?
Yes.
Okay, great. So we'll just keep it there. And if you look at today's agenda, you'll see upcoming meetings, and you'll notice that in the months of October and November, we'll need to have two meetings to deal with end of the year business. Then the third item I wanted to raise is it's time of the year. It's after town meeting. We need to select officers for the year. We've had some correspondence about this to see who is interested, and we decided we were going to keep the same officers for the coming year, that I would remain chair for a second year, John would remain clerk for a second year, and I also am happy to report that Bianca has graciously agreed to serve on the Financial Audit Committee for another year. Um, is there any discussion about that before we vote?
Warren, I just wanted to chime in on the chair position. One of the things, it seems like, if I understand correctly, it's a process related issue, and I think there is general agreement that the chair needs, it's better to keep the chair for 2 years. But is it possible for us to then make a vote rather than piecemeal, one chair at a time, but to do it, to have a discussion about just maybe changing what the chair position is and have it be a 2-year mandate rather than a 1 year?
Well, I mean, I guess not when I had discussions with folks, not necessarily everybody agreed that it should always be 2 years. And so I do think it's a good discussion for us to have, and let's have that discussion about our views about officers. But let me postpone that because we have a very action-packed agenda today. And then the second thing to note is that there's discussion on the part of the town manager, and there's been discussion with Jason, and this has come up in the past about whether light board governance should be changed because there are some ambiguities with the way the light board currently sits under the direction of the town manager, and that in effect the town manager is the chief officer of the light board, and whether that should be changed. And let's see what's going to happen with that. So I will put Bianca this on hold, and we'll come back to it well before we come to selecting a new chair next spring. Okay?
Okay, sounds good.
Okay. So we need a motion to accept those three folks.
I move that we accept the officers from the existing officers to elect them for one more year.
I'll second.
Okay, and Brian,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Bianca,
Yes.
Chris,
Yes.
and I'm a yes as well. Okay, thank you. Let's turn it over to Jason for his report.
Thank you. I wanted to let everybody know that just yesterday we got some excellent news that the school department has received an award for a grant from Mass CEC for a V2X electric charger. This is like a vehicle to whatever grid, grid to vehicle. That's how they're kind of framing it. But this will allow or install and procure a level 3 bidirectional charger for the school department at the bus depot over on Knox Trail. And I would have to say that Brian has really laid the groundwork for this for a very long time. He went to town meeting many, many years ago to get funding for the upgrades that would be required to make ready for the electrical work to get something like this installed. And Brian and Eric were instrumental. Eric Sims, our former sustainability director, were instrumental in identifying this grant opportunity and kind of working with CMLP and with the school department to try to get this together in short order. And we were just notified yesterday that they're going to select this location as a demonstration project. These chargers can be well over $100,000 in cost, and the installation of them can go to that amount as well. We don't expect it to, but all of those costs will be borne by Mass CEC for this project. And what amount of money we need to spend to get another transformer over there and the electrical ready has already been allocated by town meeting for this exact purpose. So it's not going to cost either the schools or CMLP any money that's not already been appropriated. And I think it's going to be a great project to demonstrate how the school buses can charge more quickly and be used more times per day, and also potentially have those batteries in the buses be used for other purposes. And I think the school department is eager to see what that might look like and how that might benefit them, and it can benefit the town and absorb some of that solar. So just a huge benefit. A big thanks to Brian and to Eric and Bob Conry over at the school department for participating in this and doing so much work to get it. And we're really excited to get moving on it. The timeline is there'll be some site visits and studies from now until the end of the year, December, and then they expect to have everything operational by September of next year. So could be ahead of that, but that's kind of the latest. The last installation should be then. While on the topic of grants, I wanted to mention that the Climate Action Committee's subcommittee for network geothermal has applied for a grant that is a technology grant looking at the feasibility of network geothermal. This is something that hasn't really been discussed much by the board, during a meeting, but I've mentioned it a couple times in my updates, and it's definitely been in the packet. And I have encouraged Brad Hubbard Nelson and the Network Geothermal Subcommittee to really work more to engage the light board and the town manager, since we are all big stakeholders in this. And looking at the feasibility of network geothermal for the possibility of CMLP or a utility in Concord to provide heat for people is a totally different framework from what we have, and going to require a lot of investigation and staff time. And it's something that we definitely want to rise to that level so that staff can be directed and priorities can be aligned for projects like that. But nevertheless, we're very excited about learning more about how this can work in an MLP community, especially where we have a gas distributor who is a different utility than the electric distributor. That hasn't really been studied much. So I think that's why the people giving the grant thought this might be a favorable study, just to see what kind of models would result from that. As Warren mentioned about the audit, we do have our auditors coming on site next week. The audit has been pushed from late April due to the 250th, and we also had Nan, our new financial manager, starting. We wanted to let her start, so we tried to move it to early May. Unfortunately, our auditors had kind of a staffing and personnel issue, so they've got things locked down now and are going to be coming out next week. and have promised that they can give us an expedited timetable to make sure that we're still well ahead of where we were last year, and that hopefully next year, if we do our site visit in April, that we can be done sort of by the June, July at the latest timeframe. At their May 20th meeting, the school committee unanimously voted to approve the site license for CMLP to put solar on the canopies and the rooftop at the new middle school. So that's super exciting. We haven't got the signed agreement yet, but they voted it unanimously, and the superintendent can now execute that agreement. But we have not been waiting for that. We've been moving forward. So everything is ready with the RFP. It was really just about scheduling and figuring out when the site visits need to happen, when the advertising windows are open for the newspapers and the central register. So all that's moving. Once we have the timeline of when the soonest those publications could accept our RFP publication, we will have a schedule where we can say, this is when the RFP window will be open, this is when the mandatory site visit will happen, this is when the window closes, this is when we expect to make a selection of a vendor. Laura has done a great job in getting some ideas for some vendors that we can proactively send this to make sure that this lands in the right people's lap, but it'll also be published far and wide and distributed and advertised in a lot of different places. So some people tend to find it, others, we'll definitely get it to them if we know that they've done projects like this. Since our last meeting, we have 2 new staff. I'm going to let Dale tell you about one, but the other is Joanne Miliano, who is a new customer service specialist. So welcome, Joanne. That brings that department to fully staffed. And we have the only vacancy is somebody who had left, and we're evaluating that position. So let's see. We're happy to announce that our demand response program, Connected Homes, went live on June 2nd, and we've already got over 125 applications for people to enroll, which is super exciting. Most of them have been vehicles. That's great. And thank you to Laura and the customer service team for doing a great job and getting them the requisite information, getting the word out to customers, and then this is a new process that customer service will have to do for billing. So big thanks to them for their help and coordination on that. And then finally, I know we don't have a dedicated topic on the agenda for this, but I just wanted to let the board know about time of use update relating to bill print. We've been working with NISC on adapting the bill print to include all the information that we are looking for. And where we're at now is that we're confident we can make the deadline to get a time of use bill ready for January 1st, but there are some limitations for what they can do. They kind of have they call it a minor refresh and a major refresh. The major refresh is an 18-month lead time. And, we engaged them very early, but they were still concerned about, tipping this into having to bring in a wider team. So we're confident that we can get the majority of the elements that we want. But, I think that we're going to have to say on January 1st, we're going to have most of the elements, but we're going to engage them starting now with a major refresh where we can get more feedback and do some focus groups and see what else could change. And I think it'll also be helpful once we get the feedback from the customers that we can pilot and the early adopters there so that we can incorporate those. And so I just wanted to give that update. And I see that Chris has his hand up. So Warren, that's my update.
Let's go to Chris.
Yeah, 2 quick questions. So first, the network geothermal. Do we know, are they studying the whole town, or are there specific parts of town that are looked at, or do we have any info on that?
A great question. I think that they have their eye on the MCI Concord property because they know that it will be developed soon, but not super soon. We have 2 or maybe 3 big developments that are kind of floating around with the Novo project at Baker Ave, the Thoreau Hills project on Forest Ridge, and the new Newbury Court potential project that was the zoning of which was approved, or the overlay district that was approved at town meeting that will enable that. Those are pretty soon, and it's unlikely that we'll have an entire framework to deal with this by then. But I think they're hoping that by that time frame, that maybe this will have a model that could be worked or at least studied in this location. But I think in part they're trying to identify locations where this could work, And then also they're looking at how we do this as a model, like financial analysis, how it would work as a utility, things like that.
Okay. And then my second question was about the what did we call it? Connected solutions.
Connected home.
I think I signed up in the first 5 minutes, which is great to see. I'm curious. So that's replacing the old just go program your car yourself and we'll give you $10 program. And
Yeah,
what's the plan for phasing that out?
So initially, what we communicated to users were that if you have a vehicle that is supported with the Connected Homes program, then you need to enroll in that to continue to receive the EV miles credit. If you don't, then you're staying on the existing plan. And then with our vendor, MWEC, they are continuing to add, well, it's actually not MWEC. MWEC procures the program, but the vendor is continually adding new makes, models, and years to the list that's supported. So I think it is a question that we'll have to address as to how do the programs like these impact, or tie into time of use rates. I think originally what we had communicated was that these are incentive programs to get people signed up and ready, but the time of use would be the incentive because once people enroll, they'll be saving
Right.
through the shifting of that. So I don't know, did Laura or Carol want to weigh in, or did I capture enough of that?
I think you captured most of it. I mean, I think the important thing to note is that we really are rolling out connected homes as a tool to help customers manage time of use. Those customers who don't want to be bothered with programming their own thermostats, programming their own cars, someone who wants to save on time of use rates, but doesn't want to bother with thinking about energy. That's what connected homes is for. And so the plan all along has been to phase out the incentive programs like EV miles and even the credit for connected homes, the line item credit, because as Jason said, customers will then receive the bill savings once time of use rolls out. So we're not trying to force people into connected homes. It's not a mandatory or required program. It's really just a tool that we're offering to help manage time of use rates.
Yeah, I think it's great just to connect to that and then somebody else programs my car instead of me. And I was excited to get my water heater included too. So, and I got a message the very next day because it was a hot day saying they were going to do something. And I'm not sure what happened, but it all worked great. So good job.
Perfect.
Brian,
Yeah, so the EV miles credit, so building on the previous conversation with connected homes, the EV miles credit, people continue to receive that through until time of use is implemented, and then they'll start to not receive that credit and time of use will apply. Is that correct?
Yes and no. So you can only stay in EV miles if you have a vehicle that is not supported by connected homes. If you have a vehicle that is supported by connected homes, you need to switch from EV miles to connected homes, or you start to lose your $10 per month EV miles credit.
So, so just for clarity, if I have an approved vehicle and I am requested to go to Connected Solutions and I do so, I'm going to still get that EV miles credit until time of use is implemented. Is that correct?
Well, it won't be called an EV miles credit anymore. It'll be called a connected homes credit, but the
Okay.
credit is the same. It's still $10 per month.
Uh-huh.
The
Okay.
connected homes credit is just going to be issued quarterly.
So every quarter they'll get a $30 credit.
Correct.
And when time of use is implemented, that credit will go away?
Well, the line item credit will go away, but again, if you're programming your car to charge off peak, you're going to see the savings in your
Correct.
bill.
I just don't want someone who's in EV miles to feel that they're paying, the flat rate and not getting a credit for participating and then waiting for time of use to start. I just want to make sure someone doesn't get, left in the gap. I had a question about the middle school.
hey,
So,
Brian, if we could move relatively quickly, because I want to get to,
well, Warren, I do want to be able to ask questions as a member
Yeah.
of the board.
yes, okay. Yeah, I'm not saying you can't, let's try to keep them quick.
Well, all right. Well, I'll talk to you later. So with the CMS, we now have the site license coming. We don't actually have the physical one yet. But the battery and the canopy both need the same process done. And seeing as this one took 6 months for the paperwork, are we ahead of the game and getting those requests done and moving forward?
Yeah, so this was the site license for the rooftop and the canopy. So we only need one more for the battery.
Oh, cover the canopy.
Yeah, covered the canopy. Yep.
Uh,
And so the process all along and what the school committee agreed to, and one of the reasons why they were willing to approve this is because they understood that there would be analysis before we move forward with a request for the battery site license. And it's not a matter of time, it's a matter of if the canopies are not financially viable, we don't need a battery at that site, and then we can focus on other sites for the battery. If the canopies are still financially viable, then we need the battery. But we have had those conversations, and they're aware that that's the plan, and that we will come to them as soon as we can. And I expect it will be a much faster process now. I think that the building of that new school, town meeting, all that stuff got in the way. I think that we're hoping to have bids, in the next 6 to 8 weeks, and we'll have that information very soon. And so hopefully it can be a relatively slower time where they can focus more attention on this and get it done pretty quickly. So I'm not terribly worried about the timing of that as much as it happened last time, but yeah.
So the roof is moving forward. Is the canopy going to have an RFP issued?
Yeah, so the bid that we're issuing now is for the rooftop with an add alternate for the canopy. So it'll be this one process will encompass both. And so we'll have an identified price for the rooftop and an identified price for the canopy. We put those together and we still have, authorization to borrow enough money to cover those and a battery. Then we will move forward with all three, get the site license for the battery, do the RFP for the battery, and then everything will be installed.
All right. One final comment. On the canopy, this is a little detail that's probably going to be missed. We had talked about painting the stands for the canopy the crimson, the color of the school, instead of, because I know that we've looked at the Lincoln Sudbury High School installation, and it has these gray pillars, and it's kind of brutalist in its appearance, and I don't want that for a welcoming middle school. So
Okay.
the schools love the idea of school colors as the stands.
Okay, got it.
Great, thank you. John?
Just real quickly, does anyone have a ballpark estimate in terms of what would be the rated capacity of a bus in terms of charging and discharging?
They're about 60 kilowatts up and down. They're 125 kilowatt chargers, but they can be dual headed. So we'll have more information on that, but it is going to be more of a demonstration than it is a real asset. With two buses, that's a very small, we're talking kilowatts. When we get to, a fleet of 40 buses someday far in the future, that actually may be equivalent to like a 1 megawatt up and down kind of situation. So right now it's demonstration to see what the value is to the utility, so that if we can figure out a way to have the light plant save money, share that savings with the schools to get new buses to then make a fruitious, a good cycle.
Great, thank you. Let's go on to the broadband presentation. Dale?
Thank you. So we, as Jason mentioned, hired a new network engineer. I feel like since I've been here, that's been my primary job, is hiring network engineers. And so I'm excited that Daniel Chen is joining our team. He started on June 2nd, and so now we're fully staffed in the broadband team. We're continuing work on the XGS Pond solution that we want to roll out this year. The equipment and services for the project have now been completely ordered. The purchase order is issued. The order has been issued by the vendor. They're expecting a 3-month lead time around September to start getting the equipment in. We've also worked with NISC on migrating their connection from our current tools to the new tools we'll need for this. And their timeframes and costs seem very reasonable. So I think that'll work well. We're also working on getting started on a next generation Wi-Fi solution. We realize that the Wi-Fi equipment that we're providing to our broadband customers today is outdated, and people are looking for more complete solutions. Most of these solutions that are coming out now are more subscription based in terms of pricing. And so that's one of the factors that we have to consider as we look at these, is how is it going to impact our pricing model? So along those lines, when we last met, we talked about some of the competitive pressures that we're facing and pricing pressures. And so we met with Scott Hopkinson to update the broadband business model that was first put together as we were introducing broadband in the town. And that model, we want to include the information that we reviewed from our last light board, where we talked about our services and pricing versus Comcast. We also wanted to include the enhanced services, the higher speed service that we'll be able to offer with the XGS PON solution, and to be able to address a next generation of Wi-Fi and how that would all look, and then be able to come back to the board, hopefully with some different options for pricing that would allow us to provide these services and not be losing money. So anyway, we're working with Scott on that. We don't have the model yet, but we have already been meeting with him. The automated metering system is another area that we've been focusing our time on. There's a goal to kind of bring this whole solution to a close, and we have a couple of issues that have been ongoing that we're troubleshooting. One having to do with getting meter data back to our services, our software via Wi-Fi from customer broadband. And so we're working on that. There have been some problems with that from day one. And then we've got some hardware issues in some of the purpose-built hardware that's used to tunnel the Wi-Fi, the meter data over RF back to our software. So the solution works well, but we've had these pieces of equipment that have failed and had to be replaced. I think at this time we've had like 7 or 8 replacements. So we're working with them on identifying the underlying problems and trying to stabilize that piece of the automated metering system before the project is completed. And the last thing I wanted to talk about is that our team has identified a couple of different fiber distribution hubs throughout town that are starting to wear out so a number of them, we've got 36 throughout the town, and they are kind of hubs that we distribute the fiber to customers from. And we've had a few of them that have significant water and insect infiltration. And, water and insects don't necessarily damage the fiber right away, but the insects like to eat the cover, and then that leaves the fiber exposed and less. So we're looking at starting a project to replace these ones proactively before we have major failures. So, and a number of them, we've made some spot repairs already, but we'd like to get ahead of having like a whole hub failure kind of thing and start replacing those. So those are the things that I wanted to bring to you today.
Thank you, Dale.
You're welcome.
Bianca.
So one of the things that you mentioned, Dale, was updating the business model. You talked about a lot of interesting things, next gen Wi-Fi, which I still have to do my homework to figure out what that is. But a thought that I had was, I know that there's been a lot of talk in town about cell towers. I think there was an approval for something over the landfill or whatnot. But is there a chance that perhaps CMLP could provide, let's say, Wi-Fi throughout the town that would potentially, just compete or eliminate the need for the cell phone towers, kind of put that debate or that need to rest and have CMLP provide that instead?
Yeah, there's definitely some possibilities along that lines. I'm not sure that we could provide it town-wide, but we could, for example, if you have a Comcast service, you probably know that you can go to somebody else's home who has Comcast and you can get on the Comcast network. And we could do something with the new XGS Pond solution. They also have some of these add-on services where we could offer a kind of a community Wi-Fi where our broadband customers could get access to broadband from other broadband customers in town via Wi-Fi. So, for example, if you went to a restaurant and they had our broadband, if you had our broadband at home, then you could get the community Wi-Fi there. So that's one mechanism for doing it, where any business or resident that uses our service might be able to get access to their service on somebody else's equipment. Now, it's always going to prioritize the owner's traffic first because they're paying for that service at that site, but you would at least have access wherever people have access. So that's one option. Another option is, and when I talked about next generation Wi-Fi, I was not including this because this is something we were looking at more long-term, is there are external Wi-Fi access points that we could use with our broadband solution. So then that can be done a couple of different ways. We could use it with individual broadband customers who want, say they have a large patio or a pool and a backyard and they want coverage out there. We can put them in a residence or a business where they want to cover an outdoor space. But we can also work at putting them at different places around town. The places where we most often want them are downtown. And that tends to be places where the electric is underground. And so we don't really have a place to mount them. If you look at the light poles in downtown, we don't have a path to get fiber to the light pole, even though there's electricity on the pole. So it's something that we can look at, but it's something that we'll have to work with CMLP on, and it might be something that when we are ready to replace all the light poles in the downtown area, we look at a new style of pole that has the ability to do the attachment and things of that sort. But that's definitely on our radar, on our roadmap.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Brian.
So one comment, I just bought phones for the family and updated that plan, and I'll tell you that AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, they're all trying to get ISP services as an add-on to the mobile phone. So Comcast and the satellites are also competing. So it's becoming a very competitive market. The request I had is, we had mentioned in a previous meeting that the billing for broadband is simply, this is the tier you're on, this is the price. It would be good to get some kind of user information. whatever would trigger a customer to change their plan, to put some of that data on the bill so they can see if they need to or if they don't need to. That would be helpful.
Yeah, that's something that Jason and I haven't really discussed a whole lot. I know that they're looking at making changes to the bill for time of use, and there's a concern about, Jason mentioned the kind of the small or the larger scope of change. But with the next generation of Wi-Fi solution, there will be tools available to the customer to be able to see their usage directly, not through the bill, but through an application that they would have that integrates to our cloud services.
Yeah.
So
So
we
I didn't
could,
want to go into a long discussion, but I just would like to see
you'd
something,
like to see it on the bill.
yeah, for all customers. 'Cause
And
I don't
I
have the
get that.
Wi-Fi.
That's okay. Yeah, that's okay.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Dale.
You're welcome.
Let's go on to our next and biggest item for this meeting, which is the time of use study. And before I turn it over to Laura, if I could make a request of the board so that we do this in an orderly fashion. I encourage you to ask questions as we go through the presentation, but if you could just restrict your questions to points of clarification and save your comments and opinions till the end, until after we have the whole presentation out there, I think we're less likely to get sidetracked and we could get all the information out on the table. So let me turn it over to Laura.
Thank you, Warren. I'm very excited to share with you all today the results of the cost of service study that we conducted earlier this year. It's been about 7 years since we did our last cost of service study, so we're a little bit overdue, but we're happy to be conducting it today. And I'm also excited to share with you the company that we use to perform this cost of service study. It's called Utility Financial Solutions. They've been in business a long time. Their president and founder, Mark Beauchamp, in fact, is with us today. He has decades of experience doing cost of service study and rate design. He is a frequent speaker at APPA conferences. He's a teacher of their classes. He really is an expert in this subject matter. So without further ado, I would like to turn it over to Mark Beauchamp. Thank you, Mark.
All right. Thank you, Laura. Yeah, I'm president of Utility Financial Solutions, as Laura had said. I apologize for my voice. It's not working real well right now, but we do work. We've been around since 2001, and we do work in about 46 states, including several islands like Guam, Barbados, Bermuda, and in the Caribbean. And we do the rate work for about 18% of all the public power systems in the United States. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen.
I just enabled that.
Oh, great. All right. There we go. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
All right. What we did for Concord is we went through and we did a long-term financial projection, and we built the model based on certain assumptions that I'll go through. And we look at three key financial targets. One is debt coverage ratio. We want to make sure you meet it. You're a low debt utility, so debt coverage ratio is not even an issue. You have virtually no debt. We look at how much cash you need to maintain at a minimum in your reserves in order to pay bills in a timely fashion. And if something unexpected happened to your infrastructure, that you have the funds available to make those replacements in a timely fashion. And we also look at what we call optimal operating income, which when it comes to determining something called revenue requirements is how much money you need to charge through your rates. And the optimal operating income defines what we call the upper boundary because it's not an exact science to be able to determine revenue requirements. So what we do is we develop a range. We want to make sure that you meet your debt coverage obligations, you have adequate cash reserves, and that's the minimums. The upper boundary is this optimal operating income target. And we try to set a rate track for you to stay in between. You're a financially healthy utility, and we're not proposing rate increases at all. We don't, it looks like over the next 5 years that your rates are going to be stable. We're not projecting any rate increases that are needed. Once we determine the revenue requirements, we do what's called a cost of service study. And a cost of service study looks at how much it costs to provide service to each class of customers. We look at when your peaks are occurring, what classes are using energy during that time and how much. And we allocate the cost to the different classes. What you're going to see in the cost of service results is you're relatively close, very close. There's not a utility in the country that charges 100% cost of service based rates. It's virtually impossible. So but you're very close in all the classes, other than one. I'll get to that. Then we design the rates. We also did what's called a marginal cost analysis. And a marginal cost analysis tells us the price signals we want to send to customers. Where if they choose not to use that theoretically next kilowatt hour of electricity, they save money and the utility saves a corresponding same amount of money. So that's what the marginal cost analysis identifies for us. Now, I'm kind of jumping way ahead, but there's 3 different ways to implement time of use. There's what's called an opt-in method, where customers can choose to go on it. You'll probably get maybe 10% of your customers go into time of use. Then there's an opt-out, where everybody goes on to time of use unless they choose to go on back to the regular class. Usually between 90-95% of the customers stay on time of use. And then, of course, there's mandatory. And we're going to go through the time of use for the residential and 2 different methods to implement it, to give you those options. One is a phased in approach where we do it slowly over 3 years. And the other one is to go fully to time of use immediately. And normally we recommend the phased approach, but when we ran the numbers we used about 500 customers in our data set, and there was very minimal impacts, but I want to go through those with you. Impacts as far as people seeing increases in their bill. It was pretty confined. So we were happy about that. So we want to give those options. And what we're looking for from the board is direction in how you want us to go about implementing the rate design going forward. Now, as I mentioned, when we build a financial model, it's built upon certain assumptions. And this is what we're showing here, the significant assumptions that we made in building our model. Yeah. So, like inflation, we assumed it to be 3% a year. Now, if you go back in 2022, for example, electric infrastructure cost actually increased by almost 15%. In 2024, those numbers actually increased at 22%. But we're assuming 3% inflation in our modeling. Growth, you can see it's about 2% a year. Purchase power, which is a pass through to you, the way the rates are structured, it's relatively stable in the projections. And then the capital improvement plan, you can see it's about 8 million, then 2 million, then almost 12 million, and then back to 2 million. These are the assumptions we used to build a financial model. So this slide shows the results of the financial modeling without any kind of rate adjustments. Because there's such a low debt utility, debt coverage is not an issue. We want utilities to have a debt coverage ratio that exceeds 1.4. You're at 16. I mean, it's not even a question. Cash reserves. We determine or identify the minimum level of cash, as I mentioned, which looks at things like the working capital needs for the utility, which is the timing difference between when you pay a bill and get the money from customers. For example, you may go all through the month of January, paying for labor, materials, supplies. At the end of the month, theoretically, you read all the meters. You send the bills out the first week of February. You do not receive that money back until the second week of March. So we look at that timing difference. We want to make sure that you have adequate reserves to fund your capital improvement plan and to make your debt service payments. And we factor in an element into this to look at to try to make sure that if something unexpected happened, like a catastrophic event, that you have the money in your reserves to start the repair and replacement process, not necessarily to fund an entire catastrophic event, but enough to get the process started. When we went through the analysis, it's about $12 million is what we've identified as the minimum level of cash. So we want to make sure you're above that. In 2026, you're at 14 million, and your cash is increasing each year in our projection. And in 2030, it's almost $30 million. All right. So those two are our minimums. We want to make sure that you stay above those. Our upper boundary is this optimal operating income. And what that represents is the inflationary increase in an asset's replacement cost. So, for example, if you put an asset in service that costs $1 million and you charge out depreciation expense through your rates, it's a 20-year life. At the end of 20 years, theoretically, you've received $1 million to replace that asset. But when you go to replace it, it's going to cost more than that because every year the replacement cost of that asset goes up. So the optimal operating income represents the inflationary increase in those replacement costs of all your infrastructure. That's our upper boundary. And you can see that without any rate changes, you're relatively close to that number, but you're below it. We don't want to exceed that number because if we exceed that number, then we're overcharging our customers. Okay. Is there any questions about this projection? This is kind of the
Bianca
most
has a
critical
question
part.
here.
Yeah, I just have a clarifying question on the replacement cost. so you say the replacement cost of the assets go up. Generally speaking, what we see in, let's say, other areas, is that with the advances in technology is that there is a depreciation, or a decline in, shouldn't say depreciation, a decline in a deflationary, force, power, whatever, in assets. So I'm just wondering, is that is the power industry different than other areas, or is this a labor heavy component where the price of labor is expected to increase relative to the price of the tools or raw materials?
Yeah, the things that drive electric infrastructure, we haven't seen declines. We use a 20-year average of the Handy Whitman Index, which shows how electric infrastructure costs change over time. And that's what we use to determine that. And as I mentioned a little bit ago, last year there was a 22% increase in electric infrastructure costs to replace infrastructure. It's definitely inclining. We use the average over 20 years about 5%, a little over 5% average increase year after year in electric infrastructure cost. So yeah, that's not on the decline. I understand like in Wi-Fi and those newer technologies, it does go down, but not so much with infrastructure like for electric, water, wastewater. Those tend to go up and are going up.
Okay,
So,
yeah, I mean, a lot of that was due to the pandemic too, because there was shortages everywhere, and I think there was still the supply chain was still trying to get work through. I think that we saw that big bump. Um,
but yeah.
okay, that's interesting.
John,
Yeah, just one thing that's really striking to me is the increase in the projected cash balances, whereas the adjusted operating income stays in a pretty steady state. You know, is there something there that's signaling? You know, is there, you know, does that represent additional cash that could be used to you know, reduce financing costs or something? I'm just trying to understand the implications of that.
It's a great question. What's happening there is the optimal operating income that we're identifying, that's on an accrual accounting basis. So in other words, depreciation expense is is considered an expense for that. And so that's a non-cash item. And then the cash that comes out is your capital improvement program. And you had about 8 million in capital in 26 and almost 12 million in 28. But the other years it was around 2 million, which is less than the depreciation expense. That's one aspect that's causing it. The other one is you're also adding about 5 million a year in cash through that operating income. So that's what's contributing to your cash reserves. And what's coming out is not as significant as the depreciation and the operating income. Does that make sense?
It
if,
does, thank you.
if I could follow up on John's question, why does it mean when we get to having 29 million in cash balances that we're not overcharging customers and we don't need such a big cash balance?
Great question. What that cash is going to be used for is because you're not spending as much in your capital improvement program, especially in the last 2 years, it was down to around 2 million. The need to replace that infrastructure is still there. And at some point in the future, you're going to need that money to replace that infrastructure. That goes back to that inflationary change in the assets replacement cost. And when you go to replace it, that money can be used for that. You're not overcharging customers. That's the reason why we define the optimal operating income. We want to make sure you're below it so that we are not overcharging customers. And you can see you're slightly below it in all of those years.
Thank you.
Mark, can you clarify again the definition of the optimal operating income? I think you mentioned it earlier, but I was struggling to figure out the definition.
It's the inflationary increase in assets replacement cost. So let's say you put in an asset with $1 million that costs $1 million.
Yeah.
Every year, say the inflation rate is 3%.
Mhm.
That means every year $30,000 needs to be set aside on top of depreciation expense, so that when you go to replace that asset, you have the money in reserves to replace it. The customers are using and consuming that asset during its life, and they should pay for the replacement cost of that asset.
So
And
would it be equally like if I called it just in my head to refer to it as asset replacement fund or something like that?
Yeah.
Or okay.
yes, yeah. Do have to say, from a financial standpoint, you're a very financially healthy utility. Your infrastructure is only about 45% depreciated. The average around the US is about 50%. So you have a newer infrastructure than the average utility. That tells us that you have continuously reinvested in your system. And you've done that through your cash reserves. Most utilities are heavily leveraged in debt. Most systems that are structured like you typically have a 35% debt to equity ratio. And what that means is the the value of the assets, let's say it's $100 million, that they owe 35% of that in debt, or 35 million. You guys are virtually debt free. Okay. I mean, you're very financially stable. So very impressive, actually. Is there any other questions about this slide before I get into the cost of service results? Now, the cost of service study, again, it shows how much it costs to provide service to each class of customers, compares it to the projected revenues from that class. That difference tells us theoretically how much each class of customers should rates should change to fully meet cost of service requirements. For example, residential, it shows the need for a 7% rate increase. We're not recommending that. There's not a utility in the country that charges 100% cost of service based rates. But theoretically, we use that for directional purposes. In other words, when we go do a rate design, we'd want to give a class such as residential a little bit more of an increase than what we do with the medium or large commercial, because they're showing slight decreases. Now, on average, to meet that optimal operating income, you need a 1.3% increase. And if you look at your major rate classes, they're all relatively close to that. Normally, we use a bandwidth of a plus or minus 10%. So if we see a rate class that shows a need for like an 11 or 12% increase, we probably want to give them a little bit heavier of an rate adjustment because they're further away from cost of service. You're in a very tight bandwidth. The only one that isn't is lighting. your revenue is about 60,000. The cost is of over 400,000. And that's not unusual to see that because the lighting costs to receive that, you have to bill the city, which is property tax related, in order for them to get the money, which it's more difficult for them to be able to increase their property taxes. So it's not unusual to see electric utilities subsidize lighting. Okay. Is there any questions about this?
I have one quick question. We have an old program about customers can ask to have a street light put in. Is that part of this lighting category?
Yes, yes. There's municipal lighting and private lighting built into that. Yes.
Okay. And this is more of a question for Laura. Have we ever adjusted those rates for residents that asked for a street light?
Yes, we've adjusted both the municipal street lighting rate and the private area lighting rates. This municipal street lighting rate is subject to a letter agreement that spells out the way in which the rate is going to be established each year. So we're not free to change that one other than to follow the rules that are in that letter agreement. But the private area lighting, we would have discretion to change.
Okay, and it's clearly a small program. Is it worth discussion?
I don't think we have such bigger fish to fry. I
Okay.
think, yes, we should perfect these, but let's get to the meat of the matter, so to speak.
Yeah.
Great.
If I could just, for your comfort, that lighting, in a more detailed part of the study, we actually isolated the private, and those are real close to cost of service. It's the municipal lighting
Oh,
that is causing this. Okay.
thank you for the clarity.
And Bianca has a question.
Yeah, and I might be able to go and look this up, but I thought I'd just ask, what do we pay in I know it's not considered taxes because we're an enterprise fund, but what do we transfer back to the town of Concord in terms of, again, it's not profit, but there's a word for it.
Pilot,
What is
the
it called?
payment in lieu of taxes, the pilot.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, go ahead, Mark, if you want to answer.
I don't remember off the top of my head. Mike is on the call.
It was
Laura might know.
461,000, I think, or around there last year as the pilot. And then CMLP also pays indirect costs for contributions toward IT, HR, town manager, finance, things like that.
What's the total, Jason?
I believe that last year was 620 or 30,000, so about a million, 1.1 million.
Okay. I was wondering if, I don't know if this is, if it would be too unusual to reduce some of that pilot. It is to be part of that cost of service. I don't know if that's, just to keep, if we needed to ever raise rates, like, would it be something to, we can adjust we can adjust the cost of the cost of service on the lighting via the pilot. Or is that usual?
Yeah, just one thing. The transfer payments that you make are not exorbitant compared to most. Just to let you know that obviously the lighting is part of the transfer in a sense. I mean, you have to add that into it, another 400,000. But but even with that, considering that, it's still reasonable for a municipal for what you're paying to the city based on
Yeah, it's not a question of reasonableness. I'm sure that we're not paying anything exorbitant. I just look at the cost of service that, the cost of our service to the town is 400,000, yet we're paying when we transfer cash back over to the town, over 400,000. So in all, if you add those two up, let's call it an 800,000 or $740,000 transfer to the city. And that's all. My only point is that if there's, just to put this on record and open up the discussion, if increasing rates on the residential side or any of our customers to adjust where this on the town level, because that seems to be the most
Um, there was this at one point early in my career, I I didn't like to see this. So what I would do is I would increase the transfer payment enough, sorry, that they could make they could pay for the streetlights. But there was one utility that after about 5 years after we had done that, the city came back and said, "You're called the electric light department. You should pay for the streetlights." So then they got the pilot payment and they again got free streetlights. So I stopped doing that.
okay.
All right.
Okay,
The
I think we
next,
can move on now.
okay. The one area that customers oftentimes don't totally understand is why we have a fixed monthly customer charge. And they think of it like a Dunkin' Donuts, and Dunkin' Donuts doesn't charge you to walk through the door. Why does an electric utility have to charge you a fixed monthly fee? And the difference is a Dunkin' Donuts makes an investment on behalf of the community. But electric utility, water utility, wastewater utility, they make an investment specifically for every customer. Every customer has a meter. The utility had to install that meter. They have the responsibility to repair it, to replace it, read that meter every month, and to send the customer a bill and the service drop that goes into their facility. Those are fixed costs that do not vary based on consumption. Now, excuse me, there's also another element in that we cannot get the customer electricity. There has to be a wire between the substation and the home. Without that wire, we cannot deliver that electricity. So, what we do is called a minimum system analysis. And we look at what the minimum sizing requirement is for the utility, and we roll that minimum sizing amount into the customer charge. And part of the reason why you want to get as close as you can to that fixed customer charge is because of fairness issues. I'm from Michigan, and I think Michigan's the greatest state to live in for 3 months of the year. And the and other people feel the same way. And so we have about 20% of our population that goes somewhere else in the winter months. If we don't charge the proper customer charge, then the customers that are in Michigan year round are subsidizing the customers that go to Florida, basically. And so it becomes a fairness issue. Now, your customer charge is not in bad shape. You're at $20 for residential. The study says it should be closer to 26. So one of the things we're going to ask you is, do you want to move that a little bit upward to get closer to that fixed cost? And that becomes a fairness issue. Now, over here are the components that make up that fixed charge. In other words, the 2668 is made up of the minimum system, which is $12, they have to have a transformer, that's $2.28. And then these are all costs related to the meter or the or servicing the account. So, but that's one of the things that we'll be asking if you want to move that up slightly. Is there any questions about the customer charge?
Yes, I have a question. Why is the actual cost so much greater for a small general customer than a residential customer?
Good question. Yeah, the reason you see these go up is one, because of the metering cost. When you get into even the small general, but definitely in the medium and large, this sounds kind of unusual, but the amount of electricity that they use or consume, our meters are not capable of reading that. So what we have to do is install what's called current transformers or potential transformers that ratio the energy usage down so that the meter can read it. Those are extremely expensive. That's one aspect. Also, you have different types of services, like residential are primarily what's called single phase service. But when you get into like the medium, large, and a few of your small general, they may have three-phase service, which is more expensive to construct that infrastructure to deliver that service, and that's what changes the cost.
I have one quick question, Mark. So these suggested customer charges, if they're increased, the to the rate itself will be revenue neutral in the sense that if we don't raise rates, the cost for the per kilowatt distribution fee will be reduced according to how much the increase is in these fixed collections. Is that in your method?
Yes, it is.
Great.
You're absolutely right. If we increase the customer charge and we don't want an increase revenues, we're going to lower the energy if we did that. That's correct.
Lower the energy, not the distribution.
Yeah, we're going to lower the energy rate or the demand charge. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Anything else on this slide?
Mark, did you understand Brian's question? He was asking specifically, if you're going to lower the variable charge, if we break out our
Yes.
variable charge into distribution, capacity, and energy, which of those
Oh, I see.
components would go down?
Yeah, it'd be the distribution component will go down.
Thank you.
Now, we put on potential next steps because what we're looking for from the board is your direction on what to do with rates. We're not proposing any rate increases, but there is some variation in the cost of service. In other words, the residentials and the small general show the need for an increase, but if we any additional funds that we get from that increase would be used to decrease the medium and large commercial classes. That's one of the things to consider. And usually we ask for a bandwidth if you want to do it that way of a plus or minus 2%. So what that means that no class would see an increase greater than 2%, and no one would see a decrease greater than a minus 2%. So when we work within that bandwidth to adjust the rates moving forward. All right, but we're going to go through the actual rate, some sample rate structures, and to get your input on those and to see if this is what you want to do.
Okay, Chris,
Chris,
you're on mute.
I'm sorry, I was on mute. Yes. Net metering charge, is that going to be discussed or is that part of this?
Part of our study. And it's not in this slide deck. Net metering is right now you do what's called true net metering. In other words, if a customer takes 1,000 kWh from the utility and gives you back 600, you bill them for 400 kWh. And 10 years ago, when those types of rates were structured, um, anybody within rates knew that that was a subsidy. And it's a subsidy because that 1,000 kWh that they're taking from your system, they're not reducing the distribution needs, that the sizing on the distribution system. In other words, the transformer that's servicing that home, solar tends to produce energy in the afternoon.
Yeah,
But
so I think just to cut to the chase, some of that will be taken care of when we go to time of day, but I'm specifically talking about the $10 extra. That's part of like the standard bill for somebody with net metering.
Oh, so Mark, what he's talking about is in addition to the customer charge, currently solar customers only pay a second fixed monthly charge. And it varies based on the size of their solar system. The smallest is, I think, around a $3 or $4 charge per month. And it can go up to, a couple $100 a month for very large systems, like over 150 kilowatts. So he's asking specifically about this second fixed customer charge, which was implemented in part to offset the subsidy.
yeah, that's called I'm assuming that that was structured in what's called a value as solar rate tariff or a buy all sell all.
No, it's just a component of the current. So
Correct.
it's just a component of the current tariff.
That's correct. But the way the $10 or the rate works when it was initially established, this is what I believe, is that it was computed in what is called a buy all sell all. In other words, if a customer installed a 5 kW solar generator, we know their usage or how much a solar array is going to produce over a year, and we can identify the subsidy, and then that gets rolled into that fixed monthly charge. And I'm assuming that's what you have.
It's only
That
partly
was
offsets the subsidy. It's not 100%.
not 100%.
Hey, if I
Okay.
could suggest, Laura, you take this up offline and we discuss it more at the next meeting.
Yeah, that sounds great.
And Brian, you had a
Um,
question.
a quick, so Mark, in the fact that we're going to time of use, and this is going to be a big change for our customers, would you suggest that we do no rate increases and no rate changes within rate classes, just so that we can communicate to customers that the price of stuff, for each class hasn't changed. We might change how we collect it, but it's revenue neutral so that people can understand. In 2025, under the flat rate, they paid this amount, and under time of use, they paid this amount, and the increase or decrease is their habits. Do you think that is a good philosophy to do the transition to TOU?
I think it's a great philosophy, actually. And that's actually what we have in here.
Oh,
Um,
sorry to steal the thunder. All right.
no. I'm glad you brought it up because it makes me some confidence I'm on the right track for you guys. Because that's what we thought. If we're gonna make these changes, we probably don't want to increase rates in conjunction with it. And yeah, so we're on the same track. The next question though, because we're not going to time of use for like small general, and we did propose an increase for the small general, and we're going to use that revenue to slightly reduce the medium and large. But again, that's up for discussion, of course.
Hey, before you go on, Mark, I just want to let folks know that this is a very useful discussion. We're going to defer the battery item on our agenda to allow us to continue through this. But it still would be good, Mark, if we could get through your presentation fast enough so that there is time for board comments and reactions to all this.
Okay, perfect. Um, one of the things, this is just a sample small general rate. And this is a 2% increase in the small gen. And we increased the customer charge by $4 and slight increases in the energy rates to get at that $2 average increase. And if you look at the impacts on the small general at different levels of usage, if they're a real small customer at 250 kilowatt hours a month, they would see about a 5% increase. But at 1600 or 1500, they'd see less than a 1% with this type of a rate structure. So this is just something to consider. This is the medium general rate. We're showing a slight decrease of 2%, but not everybody's going to see the decrease. It depends on what's called load factor. What load factor is a ratio between a customer's peak usage in a month compared to their average usage, because we have to build the infrastructure to handle their peak demands. And so because of that, we have a demand charge on them. And lower load factors, ones that don't use the system consistently, will see a slight increase of about 2%. The ones who use it more efficiently, they're going to see a decrease in their bill as much as 1.5%, depending on that load factor. Now, the residential time of day, what we have is basically two time periods. January, February, May through September, and December is one of the time periods. The other time period is what we call the shoulder periods, which is the months of March, April, October, and November. And so the rates are going to vary slightly between the seasons. As far as hours, the on-peak hours are between noon and 3 p.m. and 7 to 8 p.m. The critical peak is 3 p.m. to 7 p.m. All right, so we have three time periods we've created. We have on peak, off peak, and critical peak. All the other hours are off peak. And weekends are off peak. Those hours are only Monday through Friday. And also all federal holidays. And I was told Patriots Day is like a federal holiday for you guys. So we also included Patriots Day as an off-peak period. So this is the rate design that we put together for the residential time of day rate. This will not increase your revenues. It's revenue neutral, but there will be some customers that will see increases from this and others decreases. And I'll get to that in the next slide. But one of the key questions to the board, we did these slight changes to the customer charge. They're so small. But the two options that we put together is one is to phase this in over three time periods to minimize the rate impacts. So we'd go from 21 cents, 21.5 cents to these rates. So we'd move slightly, we'd increase the on-peak period slightly, decrease the off-peak period, And of course, we have the critical peak, which is increasing. It's real short hours. The other option is to go right to this rate, the phase 3 rate. And if you did that, you see the critical peak down at the bottom, which is a relatively short time period. But the cost of bringing electricity in to those customers in those hours is almost 45 cents. So we want to send that price signal, at least, whether or not the board wants to do it quickly or wants to do it over time, you'd be going basically doubling the critical peak from 21.4 to 44. But the offset would be all these off-peak hours, which there's a lot more of. That will go down from 21.5 cents to 16 cents. And when we looked at the impacts, this first one is if we did the phase-in approach, what would be the impacts? And what we saw of the 500 residential customers, these are the ones that saw the biggest decreases, the top 15, where the decreases went from 6% to 11%. On the increase side, the ones that saw the biggest increase, it was typically around 4%, so nothing major. But it was, so it wasn't, it just moving in that direction. Now, and the advantage of this is that nobody's going to see dramatic changes in their bills initially. And utilities, a lot of times, will start this process this way because they want to get customers used to time of use. They're not from, historically, we've never billed electricity this way. So we want to get them used to it. And then they can purchase the enabling devices to allow them or help them to shift their electric consumption. We also looked at what if we did it all at once? And those 500 customers, some saw decreases. 4 of them, 5 of them saw double-digit decreases. The ones that saw increases, it was 10% was the max, 11% here. So it wasn't that dramatic. If you did choose to go fully to time of use, all time of day, all at once. So this is really one of the biggest questions I have for the board is how they want to implement this.
So,
Oh, go ahead.
Mark, we're still, I assume you're still not looking for our reactions to all this, and we're just talking about clarifying questions. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay, John and Brian have clarifying questions.
Yeah, Mark, what kind of assumptions did you make regarding how people's consumption patterns would change? Did you just assume that they would have a static consumption pattern and they wouldn't respond to these price differences to establish these rate impacts?
For purposes of what you're seeing here, we did not assume that they would change their usage pattern.
So to the degree that they responded to prices, the impacts would be lower, correct?
It would be, yes, that
Yeah.
is correct.
Great, thank you.
And my gut tells me you're going to see in that critical peak period probably about a 7 to 12% reduction in residential usage during those critical peak hours with this full time use price signal, because we have about a 2-to-1 price differential, more than that actually. You might even get greater response.
Thank you, Brian.
So with I actually the shoulder months and the standard months, I had a question about that. Do you think it will be confusing to customers to have 2 months at the shoulder rates and then have 4 months or 5 months at the standard rates and flipping between those? Do you find that customers can understand that, or will they have a lot of complaints because they see a bill one month and then the rates change for the different time period on the other?
Um, it doesn't seem like that is confusing to them. The
Okay.
most utilities that do this do have summer and non-summer basically. Um, and because your costs are so much different in those time periods, especially in your market, the ISO New England market, the costs vary substantially. And it seems like the residentials don't get confused by it.
Okay.
Obviously, there's an education that needs to go with this. You
Yes.
have to educate your customers as to how this rate works.
I have another question. Is it possible that you could run these numbers with going to the $26 as the fixed collection, not 22? And then the other part of that question is you showing the top 15 and the bottom 15 and the most extreme changes, but it would also be nice to see how the 500 cohort, how many saw, did 300 see an increase and 200 saw a decrease? Did most people see an increase or a decrease? That also would be helpful.
Yeah, we can definitely do that. We have that data. I just don't have it in the model.
Okay.
I think Mike is on the call.
Yeah, I am. I really like that idea. I think I'll
Yeah.
include that going forward, but I will update it, make sure it's in the
Right.
slides whenever you get them.
So, Mark, what other information do you need to present to us now before the board gets a chance to give some reactions to all of this?
Yeah, I'm almost done. Just the yeah, actually that's the last of the presentation. So
Okay, what reactions do people have on it? And especially on the issue that Mark was raising about whether to go whole hog or phase things in or anything else. John and then Brian.
Yeah, I guess I have to say, in terms of a comment, I'm surprised in terms of how modest the rate impacts are. And this is even without considering any change in behavior. So I think that really probably overstates the magnitude of rate impacts that most people are going to see. And that to me suggests that we can be bolder, and maybe have two periods when conceivably we could phase these rates in. Um, the other comment I'd have, and it's kind of getting down into the weeds, it's reflecting back in terms of what SMUD did. And we have a 4-hour critical peak window, when I'm wondering if there's a rationale for a 3-hour critical peak window. I looked at some of the summary statistics, Mark, that you had in your presentation, which was effectively in the appendix. And it seems like that the rationale for, I think it's the 4 p.m. being in that window, is largely driven by the anticipated likelihood of one, overall system peak. It's driven by capacity prices. But as we discussed earlier, I think it was way back in January, right, that the cost of capacity is essentially 1/4 that of transmission. So a shorter period, to me, is going to be easier for customers to respond to. They're going to be able to really focus in terms of those 3 hours and shifting their consumption to those 3 hours. And that can be done by, turning off air conditioners, turning off heat. And I think to the degree you move to 4 hours, it just gets that much harder to do. So just those are some of my thoughts and comments there.
Mark, do you
Justin.
want to respond to any of that before we go to Brian?
Yeah, I would if that's okay. I just want you to understand that there's two things that you want to consider, and we definitely can shorten the window. But if we do that, that's going to drive that 44 cents higher, probably closer to 50 cents. That's one. Two, with that strong of a price signal, um, customers will respond even more. You're absolutely right. And what may happen is where you get into a situation where you start that cliche of chasing the peak. And so that's the reason why we have the on peak period surrounding the critical peak, because we don't really want to get into situations where we're changing those critical peak hours. I mean, yeah, maybe 4 or 5 years from now, we may have to, but we don't want to be doing it continuously. And that's always a concern. So that's why we have a little bit longer window than what the probabilities show.
But understanding that at least from my perspective, the real driver of these costs in this critical peak period are transmission charges, which are assessed on a 12 CP basis, as well as the peak, which is, based on the coincident peak. If our consumption is not in those windows, right, we're only talking about changing Concord's behavior. We're not talking about changing all of ISO New England's behavior. So if we're able to shift our load from these hours, I don't think we're in a chasing the peak situation. I think we're in a situation where we're avoiding the peak that ISO New England's experience, and we're able to reduce costs on the CMLP system. I hear what you're saying, and I think that in the future could be a risk, but I think that there is an opportunity here. And good point in terms of that $44 might become, or excuse me, 44 cents per kilowatt hour might become 50 cents per kilowatt hour. And that might suggest that, okay, if we are going to phase it in, maybe phasing in over 3 years would be more appropriate. But just some thoughts there.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Ryan,
So on the monthly customer charges, I would like to see us move to those assessed values in our rates rather quickly. That's the shift from variable collection to more fixed collection. The seasonal component of the rate, where you have standard and shoulder, the hours for your critical peak will be different in summer and winter because we have a lot of in-town solar, which creates this unicorn peak load curve, and it happens around just after sunset. So if sunsets, an hour or two earlier in the winter than it does in the summer, our critical peak window will need to cover both of those times. So that would make it wider. So I just want to make sure that either we keep that 4 hour window and design it to cover the winter peak and the summer peak of our load curve. But the alternative is to create not just a standard and a shoulder, but a third, a summer, a winter, a shoulder. That way we could set the hours more appropriately for the winter season versus the summer season. And I'm in favor of a the phase one for next year and then go to phase three for the following year. Because I know that customers will, a few customers will complain about the impacts of TOU just from the change from, going to a flat rate to, oh, I tend to consume all my power during a peak time. And with a small change, we can get through those. And then when we implement a big change, going to the real TOU rate for phase three, we can start to really get on board with where we want to be to get people to engage and shift load. So I came into this thinking, let's just go straight to a big whack of TOU phase three, I forget what you called it, but that I think that's where I am on those issues. I want to know what your thoughts are on those.
I think that it's a good strategy from the standpoint that if you when you do that modest price signal, you're preparing the customers um, and giving them notice in a sense that your costs are different, so they can start moving in that direction, and then going to full phase three. So that is definitely a good view. You know, that's
Good. Hey, thanks. Before we go on, we were supposed to adjourn at 9:20. Is everybody okay staying till 9:30? Okay, we'll stay at 9:30. At 9:25, we're going to switch to public comment. Chris.
Yeah, so I'm speaking directly about the fixed charges, and what I think I saw in there is that in general, those charges are too low for residential customers and maybe too high for commercial customers. And I heard Brian, I think,
No, that
speak.
wasn't true.
No? Okay. But
No.
there was an idea of sort of rationalizing those, that there should be an increase on the residential, but not the commercial. Did I miss that, Phil?
I don't
I
want to
think
speak for
all
Mark.
of the fixed charges are too low compared
Okay.
to the data that Mark has presented for
Okay.
both commercial and residential.
I must have, I'll go back and look. It felt like the residential had a bigger gap than the commercial then. In any case, I mean, I think that's a political decision for us to think about how we balance residential versus commercial. And I'm sure that this is a question the board has looked at a lot in the past. So the idea of just arbitrarily saying, let's make them all what the actual costs are is not necessarily something I would support.
No, I would not either.
Yeah, but Chris, you're also conflating two things. One's the fixed charges, where the fixed charges are too low for everybody. And then the other issue is whether people are paying the full cost of their service between the fixed charges and the variable charges they're paying. And in that
Right.
case, the residential are paying less than the actual cost, but the large commercial is paying more.
Okay.
Thanks.
I'll take
Bianca.
another look at it. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'd just like to provide some of my thoughts. In terms of the time of use, I'm in favor of going whole hog on it, but with the caveat that we go into we do potentially do a phase one, but that would be a beta period where customers opt in into the whole hog rate just to get, where we can iron out the kinks. So we're not going to, at every board meeting, be inundated with, 20 unhappy people and having to deal. So I thought phase one, beta test it, but with the whole hog, just like full blast on the rate increases. Second, SMUD was so thoughtful about the way they did this. And one of the things that was very clear from their presentation was that they picked a single time period. People are not going to remember more. If we give them multiple time periods, it's 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. on, March and April, October, November, but then every other time it's going to be from 3 p.m. to 7 p.m. And then in between time, there's also this mid peak and soft peak and whatever. That's way too much. So a single time period, if it's a 4-hour period, great. And then if there is going to be a seasonality, which it seems like that would be normal, pick winter, we can, advertise it as winter is coming with a sticker, winter is coming, and then have the, potentially, slight, however you want to do it, but like no more than that, because it just is not, I don't think, anyway, SMUD did their work, and I really appreciated the work that they put into it and support what their views.
Yeah, I wanted to put my 2 cents in as well, but Mark, do you want to respond to any of these comments before I put my comments out there.
There we go. I'm a little bit, I think you want us to be able to have one set of hours in a sense throughout the whole year. And that's, did I misread that?
Yeah, are you asking me or?
I'm asking you, yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so just in terms of advertising, yes, I would suggest us picking a single time period to focus on. Because having multiple time periods is is just not manageable. Most people this is an afterthought for most people. Um, and so yeah, I would suggest picking a single time period, probably that 3 p.m. to 7 p.m. or 4 p.m. to 8 p.m. whatever that was. Yeah.
So you're talking about just having two time periods in a sense, on peak and off peak, or on peak, off peak, and critical peak.
Just on peak, off peak.
Okay. That's going to diminish the price signals, if we were to do that. Well,
On
um,
Hey,
we
Mark, could
can
I ask
definitely
a
propose
question
that,
related
yes.
to that?
Sure,
Because
sure.
my, I'm not on board with everything in Bianca's proposal, but the one thing I did resonate with was this issue of the three different time periods during most of the year, the on-peak, the off-peak, and the critical peak. And looking at your numbers, the difference in the cost between the on-peak and the off-peak is so minimal. That seems to me that's just going to confuse people. And why wouldn't we just do critical peak and off peak? And we wouldn't call it critical, it would just be on peak and
Yeah,
off peak. And you have the
we
four
certainly could.
hour on peak and you forget about all the other hours that are the same.
I see. Yeah, actually, that probably could be done, yes. We can look at that. But I think you're probably right. There wasn't that big of a difference.
It's like
The
less,
reason,
it was less than a cent difference, which I think is just going to confuse people if you try to get them to try to distinguish between things at 21.2 cents and 21.4 cents.
Yeah.
I think the reason we did that, there were times where the peak actually occurred outside of the critical peak period. And so we rolled those costs into the on peak. It was just a slight, let's put it this way, there's a certain amount of times that will happen where the peaks will occur in the on peak hours. But we can certainly do that. I mean, let's put it this way, if you feel the implementation process is easier just having on peak and off peak, maybe as a board, that risk is tolerable. In other words, acceptable to you if, if we do peak outside of the critical peak.
Jason, then Brian.
I just wanted to point out that to Bianca's point, this is SMUD's website showing their time of day rate. And while they advertise heavily that peak rate, they do still have this mid-peak kind of on the other side of it. So it is a model that SMUD uses, I think, to capture the cost of service. But you'll see, to Warren's point, that it's about a 5 cent differential between off-peak and mid-peak. So that does send a price signal there, whereas this one probably doesn't as much. But I did just want to point out that they do that.
Brian.
I just had a final question. Did you do any consideration of a super off-peak for, EVs to charge or batteries or anything where a customer could shift load to the middle of the night?
I think that's what we're trying to do with the time of use rate. Normally, what we do when you implement this, if you do a phased-in approach, that would then go to all the residentials, but you still have the full time of use option available for anybody who has an electric vehicle and wants to charge at night. So that's still available to them. Because that
So,
really, the rate is a super off-peak in a sense. It's a cheaper rate at night.
I
okay,
think
so it
Brian
looks like
talked about a
eight,
super off peak, like just having a set hours that was like at a discount to really kind of, is that right, Brian?
yeah, something like 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. have, a penny less, just to give people a target for, when they shift load. And it doesn't matter when during the day it happens. Just
Um,
filling in the trough of our load curve.
we can look to see if there is any cost difference during that period of time, but by doing that, we're going to be making the rate more complicated.
Yeah, it's true. And if there is no cost savings, then it's not worth it. But
Yeah.
I just want to know if it was considered. Thank you.
Uh, yeah, we didn't look at it quite that specifically, but we can definitely take a look.
So if I could make a couple comments in part because I'm not going to be at the next meeting, and listening to all these comments, I especially like Brian's idea of having just one transition year and not doing a three-step process, but not going whole hog right away. I like the 4 hour on peak period. I, in general, like all the other rates that Mark's proposed. The thing I feel the most strongly about is not having that on peak, off peak, mid peak. I just think keeping it simple, telling people through most of the year, what you got to worry about is getting your use out of these 4 hours, and that's what you worry about. Don't worry about anything else. The, those are my comments for the board to think about when you actually come back to this next meeting. And Mark, it seems like you'll be able to, if you could get some of this information that Brian asked for sooner, and that it could be circulated to people before the next board meeting, that would be great.
Certainly do that. And it sounds like go ahead. There's other hands.
No, that was all I was going to say.
Oh, it sounds like there's the two things. One is increasing the customer charge. It seems just in the comments that you're okay with that. And to move to a two time periods rather than three. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I'm still in favor of 3. I just don't want to. I still like the mid peak.
So I would, and just to not to compliment, not to complicate things further in terms of opinions, but I would say if there is like a super, if I would support 3 periods if like there's a discounted rate over the night, or during a time when people who have EVs, those things are programmable. So it's not something people would have to think about. Just program your vehicle to just charge during certain hours at a discounted rate. I think that would be easy to implement and certainly would warrant having a third.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be opposed to that either, but my sense is if we're going to have 3 time periods, it has to be a meaningful price signal, not something that's less than a penny. It's just not worth confusing things.
In the final phase, I just want to clarify because you talked about doing 2 phases. One is going to be next year will be a very
Yes,
very
yes,
small deltas, but the final will be the real deltas.
yeah, fair
Okay.
enough. Mark, do you have any famous last words for us? This is really helpful. You've done great work. It's really useful.
Thank you. Only one other thing. I think that the consensus is to shorten 4 hour window to 3 hours.
I wouldn't necessarily say that,
No, okay.
but
All right.
I wouldn't say that either.
Okay. Okay, good, good.
okay, let's go to public comments. Any public comments? Carlin Reed from the Finance Committee, then Don Kupka.
Thank you, Carl Reed, Finance Committee, speaking on my own behalf. I would recommend two things. One, consider including in your charts the demographics of residential users. For example, I use on average 200 kilowatts per month. I think I'm on really, really low end. And so that will affect my impression of the rate changes. It might be useful to see how many people are at this level, this level, this level. Second, I suggest you go back to the very beginning point, which is, does the light plant actually need this rate increase? I'm not convinced based on today's presentation that you need it. I think you want it, but I'm not sure that you can demonstrate need based on what you've shown now. So that's my suggestion, that you consider that. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you.
Sorry, I just want to clarify. I don't think we're talking about a rate increase.
Yeah.
We're talking about a change to the rate structure. So revenue neutral means we're going to collect the same amount of money, just in a slightly different way.
Good
Got
point.
it. I understand. Got it.
Okay, Don.
Yeah, thank you. I would say keep in mind what Thoreau said: simplify, simplify, simplify. What I'm struggling with is trying to understand the objective, the problem you're trying to solve by adding complexity to the rate structure. Secondly, if we're going to create a differential for nighttime, but we're also spending money to install batteries so that we can provide clean power at night, will that nighttime rate actually be higher than the daytime in order to recoup the cost of the batteries when we're providing clean power then? I should also say I'm also on Finance Committee, but I'm also speaking for myself. Thank you.
Thank you. And Dinos. You may be on mute.
I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
We got you.
Great. Okay, so I had a couple questions. First of all, I didn't understand the need to increase the fixed charges. And if you go back to that slide where it was presented, it looked as if there were some charges for transformers and distribution that were included in that fixed charge cost analysis, not just the meter reading and the meter charges. So, and I didn't get the explanation there.
If I could make a suggestion, that's a good point. If Mark, at the next meeting, you could go into the fixed charges. We're not going to have time now. Go
That's fine.
through and
Okay,
review that and
sure.
have a discussion about that so that it's clear to the board and other folks there.
Okay. Can I move on to my next question then?
Yes, please.
Right. So I totally support what you said, Warren, about keeping it really simple. And also, there's no point having extra periods when the price difference is pretty small. And beyond that, the other question is whether to make it mandatory or opt in. And the Finance Committee member with a 200, kilowatt hour per month use, I mean, for that demographic, opt in seems pretty reasonable. I think, on the other hand, if you have an EV user, they should be mandatory because they have a large load that could really benefit a lot from having the time of use rates. So as far as other people, I'm just not so sure, but those are my comments.
Hey, thank you. Good comments. And
Thank you.
Pamela Dritt.
Warren, I would like to just, if possible, I just want to, Don asked a very good question about, which is essentially saying, why are we complicating things with time of use? And I would just like to take a moment to respond to his question, to his and Carlin's question that kind of tied in together, and to just make sure, and I think this should be part also of our marketing campaign or campaign around the time of use, which is directly related to climate change.
No.
There are financial benefits to CMLP as well, but the climate benefits are very clear, and it has to do with peaker plants, right? When you have a base load of energy that we buy, we buy power and we have a base load portfolio. But when not just Concord, but when other utilities then increase demand beyond the base load that's being contractually supplied, peaker plants come into play. And the peaker plants are usually the most polluting plants that we have. So these would be, coal and so forth, something that can quickly come online to fill in the peak supply. So when we reduce the peak, there are direct climate benefits associated with that. And then I think with John made comments about on the cost side to CMLP, that's mostly on the transmission side. So that there's also some financial benefits, obviously, that would accrue to CMLP and potentially, allow us to do other programs. So that I just want to make sure that we communicate to the community that this is not a, I think we all want to keep things simple, but we live in a very complex world. And so we're trying to manage all kinds of things. And top priority, I think, for everybody is the climate and planetary.
Thank you, Bianca.
I
I
wanted
need to
to,
leave. My apologies.
thank you, John. I wanted to, I was waiting to make a similar response to Dawn, but whereas Bianca is talking 80% climate, 20% cost, I would be the complete opposite. The whole point of time of use is to relate our expenses to the behavior of our customers so that we create the win-win where when our customers save on the bill, we lower our rates. Because 30% or so of our expense is when people consume electricity. And if we incentivize them to more have a level load, our rates go down. So that is the primary driver for TOU. And yes, we're trying to make it simple, but it's a complicated world. So I'm trying to be very quick.
Thank you. Yeah, I just don't want to give Pamela Dritt short shrift. She's been very patient, and it's Pamela.
I had my video turned off. 13 Concord Green. Please don't conflate simplicity with clarity. It is not. In your effort to simplify, you can often make it more confusing. If you want us, we customers want to help, like Brian just said. The benefit to mapping this as close as possible to reality gives better price signals to the customer so that they can change their behavior to benefit everybody more. And if you don't give us enough information and enough time period, do the shoulders, do different rates at different times. It sounds like that's complex, but it's not. It's directly linking the behavior to saving money for not just individuals, but the whole community. And we can do that. We're not children. You all can answer the questions, and please make sure that you do the opt out. So the default is you're participating, because otherwise we'll have an organ shortage. Countries that have opt out for organ donations don't have organ shortage.
Yeah.
Countries that have opt in, they do, because most people don't bother. They just do the default. Same with.
Thank you. I mean, one thing I should say, I think the board is on record previously as saying we want to go to an opt-out approach, not opt-in. So can we have a motion to adjourn?
We also have to get enough money to invest in the infrastructure projects that we did.
Yes.
And we need to incentivize customers to do the solar and the battery investments. And you got to make sure that we don't financially disincentivize solar installations and battery installations and heat pump installations. So that's
Thank you.
In the pricing too.
Thank you. We've significantly exceeded our time. Can we have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second?
Second.
Okay. Bianca?
Yes.
Chris?
Yes.
John?
He's left.
Okay. Brian?
Yes.
And I adjourn as well. Thank you very much. This was a very interesting presentation and discussion.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Terrific.
A lot of good stuff.